Welcome to Voice of the Mountain. Clearly, I am not Steve House, founder and CEO of Uphill Athlete, but he is here. Say hello, Steve, so the audio listeners know you're here. My name is Jamie Lyko. I am the producer of the Voice of the Mountain podcast, as well as the Uphill Athlete podcast. Today, we also have with us Kyle Lefkoff, who joined Steve earlier this season. For those who don't know, Kyle has spent nearly 4 decades as a venture capitalist in Boulder, Colorado, investing in 65 companies, including Array Biopharma, which he co-founded in 1990, until it was acquired by Pfizer in 2019 for $11 billion. But before that, Kyle was a climber and a mountain guide who tested himself around the world, including on the 1986 American expedition to the North Face of K2. He was the founding chairman of the board of the American Institute for Avalanche Research and Education, known as AIRE, the evidence-based avalanche education authority used by guides and snow professionals across multiple countries in North and South America to help keep our mountain athletes safe. Besides being an accomplished businessman and guide, he's an author, a devoted family man, and a believer in the explorer's mindset. By his own admission, he lives in Boulder, Colorado because it's the only place that his job and his pursuits can live side by side.
If you're enjoying the show and want to take the next step in your training, join our newsletter and receive a free 4-week sample training plan. Head on over to uphillathlete.com/letsgo, and once you sign up, you'll instantly get a link to try out some of our most popular training plans. It's a great way to get a feel for how we train our athletes for big mountain goals. Check it out at uphillathlete.com/letsgo. That's uphillathlete.com/LETSGO.
Kyle, welcome back.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate it. I was resistant when Steve first asked me to be on the Uphill Athlete podcast because I'd never done a podcast before, and
you were great.
I did my best. It was terrifying, but I'm really pleased today to be on the other side of the table and to interview Steve House as a follow up to this excellent season of discussions that Steve and you hosted on the podcast with a group of really experienced alpinists and business people who cross both of those worlds. And those are really interesting discussions to me because they focused the conversation on a set of topics that I think are really relevant, and that now we can turn the tables on Steve and get his feedback, having led those conversations. I'm pleased to introduce Steve House, my long-term friend and climbing partner and fellow mountain guide, who is the greatest American alpinist of his generation. His record of ascents in the Alaska Range, in the Himalayas, in various sub-ranges of North America, are as a songbook unparalleled amongst his peers. His success in the mountains and his success now in the business he created, Uphill Athlete, gives him a really good perspective to interview the people he did, all of whom I know very well, as it turns out. And I have to say that it was not my idea, Steve, that you talked to John Windsor and Randy Levitt and Greg Penner and Peter Metcalf as examples of people who have both industrial experience and successful alpine careers. But you did so. And some of the themes that emerged from those discussions were both consistent and consistently interesting, I think. So I'd like to focus our talk today on the takeaways from those discussions.
I'm so glad you found those interesting. And this is you are in a way both the audience for the interviews, but also for the listenership, because there's so many incredible business people and entrepreneurs and professionals of every stripe out there in the Uphill Athlete community, whether they're, doctors running a general practice, or venture capitalists, or like all kinds of contractors, all kinds of people running all kinds of interesting businesses out there. And there is so much, I think, that our community consistently sells itself short, in my opinion, on like the depth and breadth of skills and intelligence and agency that as a community we possess and have and bring to the world.
So I want to turn the tables back on you then, Steve, from our from our review of this year's podcast, one of the things that you consistently ask to everyone, including me, is what do the mountains give to you? What do the mountains give to you? If you look back at your career, both as an alpinist now and as a business leader, what's your key? What's the number one takeaway that the mountains gave to you in your life?
I just spent the last weekend with my parents, and the topic came up that, of course you're with your, mom who's in her 80s, and she had to, for some reason, I don't know how it got to this, but she brought out the baby book. And then there's the drawings I made when I was 5, and it was mountains. So, I'm not sure what the attraction was, but, I was always a mountain person. Like, that was my place. That was my peace. It was also became my community. And I found that just by sheer force of, I'd say, magnetism. I found that in high school with the friends I made that I started rock climbing and backcountry skiing with. I found that when I went to college with a community of climbers and skiers there. I found it, when I went abroad for the first time in a climbing club in Maribor, Slovenia. And so I'd say what mountains have given me is the through line to everything in my life. Like, it's what connects, my professional climbing career. It's what connects my guiding career. It's what connects uphill athlete. It's what connects how I spend my free time. I just got back from an amazing 2-week trip of ski touring in British Columbia in the mountains. There was never any thought of going to the beach or whatever. I like to do that with my kids, but if it's my time and I get to do what I want, then I'm going to spend that time in the mountains.
So mountains gave you community and they gave you identity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And they gave me a professional path.
But as Melissa Arno pointed out in her segment, they also introduce risk to your life and a level of risk that's not typical of the way most people lead their lives. How do you think about her idea of this toxic risk that you have to be so comfortable with putting your life at risk and the lives of others as a mountain guide that it's almost a liability to be that comfortable with risk?
Yeah, it is interesting. And you and I were just, as we were warming up here, talking about how we've both enjoyed being guided as well as guiding. And I mentioned how it's really hard for me to be guided poorly, but I really enjoy being guided well. And that's one of the main things that I'm noticing when I'm being guided, as I was in British Columbia 2 weeks ago. And it's so interesting as a professional guide to watch and sort of almost read the mind of another guide making those just, it's not just one decision, right? Like it starts days before with knowing what the snowpack is. This is, in this case, we're ski touring. So that's the context. So avalanche risk is the primary hazard. And there's just like decision after decision after decision after decision, like down to it's almost like having a really good mission statement for a company. Mm-hmm. Like the mission statement for the day of being in the mountains is to stay safe. And that defines so many decisions. And but what stay safe means to different people, can be very, very different because we do have different risk tolerances. And I think that one of the jobs of a mountain guide, and one of the things that I think we get good at, is that we get good at defining what that risk cap is and then getting right up cozy next to it and not going over it. Like that's the magic.
Mountain guides, to be successful, have to be good at client care and they have to be good at risk management.
Yep.
Those are two different universes for most people. One of the things that came out in Melissa's podcast view is that, she has her own view of risk management. I have no sense of how good she is at client care, what it's like to be in the mountains with her. Same thing with Dwight. That dude, he's great at getting Hollywood celebrities as buff as they can get. You saw those guys on the the movie he helped make 300, about the defense of Thermopylae, which I loved. It was fantastic.
And
right?
Superman, Henry Cavill.
I think those. I don't think that's CGI, is it? They're authentically ripped, CGI. Because of what Jim Jones did for them, right? So he's really good at that. But how is he at client care, right? Did they come away with with a positive view of Mark Twight after their experience of getting ripped for 300?
I think they did, because Mark's approach is, he has this sort of saying that I've tried to figure out a way to rip it off without making it sound exactly like what he says, but his saying is the mind is primary. And if you look at it from that perspective, whether the training in the gym is all based, or training outside is all funneling into like how you show up, what your self-talk is, what limits you set on yourself, how you allow yourself to expand those limits or not, how you show up for other people that you're training or climbing or skiing with, how you show up for yourself, how you're honest or dishonest in all these relationships with yourself and with others. I mean, so the mind is primary. And I think I've seen Mark work with athletes, one-on-one and in groups. And, the public image of Mark is this tough guy, right? But he's actually an incredibly compassionate, empathetic person, which is also what makes him an incredibly good artist, because he just walks into a room and he can feel what other people are feeling. He knows what other people are feeling just by.
He has empathy for the people.
He has empathy,
training,
which is not what people think of when they think of Mark Twight. And I think that to have good client care, you have to be empathetic. Absolutely. And in my 20s, I was a terrible mountain guide in the category of client care, because I had no empathy. I was just like, I could charge all day, and if you wanted to be like go up a route and fast and safe, I was your guy. But we probably didn't have a lot of laughs.
It's a tough line to hoe. What was he like climbing with? Because you actually did a big route with him on, I think, the south face of Denali. You guys climbed together. You weren't guiding each other. You were climbing partners. Was he a good partner to have on a route like that?
And we were climbing partners a bunch, actually. All in Alaska, but we climbed a number of times in Alaska together, including an attempt on the Slovak Direct the year before where we didn't even get on the route, but we spent a month trying. So we spent a lot of time together in the mountains, and our relationship is really easy, to be honest. Like, we're very different, but. And he and I were talking about this recently, because he was trying to write something about one of our experiences together, and he was struggling with it. And he was comparing it with trying to write about his experiences with one of his other partners who's been on the Uphill Athlete podcast, Scott Backes. And he and Scott have this, they bring out the extrovert in each other, and they are really, so when he writes about Scott, he just has to remember the dialogue and write it down. And it's funny, because those guys are funny together. And Mark and I are not funny together. We're very different. We're two introverts, and we bring out the introvert in one another. So, we would communicate. I remember after the Slovak Direct coming down the next day, we just sat in the tent, and with the little speakers and the Walkman or in the CD, it was a mini disc player for if you really want to date us. And he just played music for like hours, like 3 or 4 hours. We didn't talk. He just DJ'd, if you will, just played song after song after song. That was a form of communication, and a very deep form of communication. And it was an amazing experience. And I still get goosebumps thinking about it, but we weren't I don't know, being bros or high-fiving each other or being loud. We had our own way of communicating.
Did you feel like his decision-making under conditions of uncertainty and his risk management were on point in those expeditions?
Yeah. So he was more conservative than I am.
Huh.
The reason
that's not his public persona, obviously.
Yeah, but I think the reason is that, and I think you would agree with this, at that point in his career, my career respectively, I was a better climber. And so I could do things that he couldn't do safely. So that, this is where the intersection, and this is one of the things I wanted to get out of these topics with business leaders, and is like, as you get better at something, you can control the risk more carefully because you can do things more precisely. You know the outcomes. You've done enough reps through this thing that you kind of like, okay, you know how close you can
Right.
go. That's one of the things that made it hard as becoming an older alpinist and seeing those abilities decline. I also had to reduce my risk tolerance, and it felt like my world was crumbling in a way, if that makes sense. Even though that's being dramatic, but it wasn't ever the same as it had been, and that's I think another adjustment.
I was wondering, for both you guys, you talk about being guides. You talk about risk management and how it changes, risk assessment, I should say. Where did you guys both consciously, when you went into business, did you feel it immediately that you had to step up on other people because you could look at things that way, because you were taking into account client care, looking out for the people that work for you, but also wanting to take big swings in business? Did that click as something like, oh, that's something I already have that arrow in my quiver? Or did it take time to realize, like, oh, I really learned these really valuable lessons on the mountain that can apply?
Jamie, I think that when you're a mountain guide, you can never turn it off, even when you're being guided by somebody else. And the same is true in business. When you're a mountain guide, you can't not be a mountain guide, even if it's a business meeting.
Hmm.
And it kind of that experience informs the way you lead your life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how Steve feels about that, but that's my position.
Yeah, I had this experience a few years ago where I was, as you said, Jamie, taking a big swing. I was trying to build my own AI model for building workouts for mountain athletes, and it was expensive and it was terrifying. And I was like, from the I wanted to bootstrap it. Meaning that I wanted to just fund it from my own, the revenue of the company. So I stopped taking a salary for a long time. I just put everything into this thing, lived off some savings, and it was really scary. And I had a lot of really sleepless nights, and during every one of those sleepless nights, I would just think to myself, like, man, this isn't as scary as being halfway up Nanga Parbat with no way to go back down except going to the summit. This isn't as scary as, like, I could come up with 50 examples because I wasn't going to die. I could maybe go bankrupt, would be the worst thing, or I could not pay the next invoice to the computer scientists that were running the model building, but I wasn't going to die. I was going to lose my life. And so I was able to be comfortable with a large amount of discomfort that I think that most people wouldn't be. And that actually, in a way, at the time, I don't remember if we talked about this, Kyle, but I thought of that like, man, this is actually kind of a competitive advantage,
Mm-hmm.
because very few people are going to be able to be this uncomfortable. And the
Well,
only other way to do this,
the worst that happens to you as a venture capitalist is you lose someone else's money. That's not a consequence as mountain guides that we worry about.
right, yeah. So that felt like I could, good information. Like, I can push through this. It's scary, but that also means that a lot of people are going to peel off at this point and not compete with me beyond this point. Of course, that whole thing didn't really work, but I mean, some of it didn't work, but that's kind of the way these things go. And we're still here, and we survived, and we're on to the next thing.
Let me ask you about Windsor's interview, because I thought that was one of my favorites and really interesting.
Mine too.
And of course,
he was so good.
And John and I have been friends and climbing partners and ski partners for decades. And I served on the board of one of his publishing companies. And his dad, John Windsor Sr., who was a publisher himself, was an early investor in my venture capital fund. So there's a long history there. of the two of us. So I was really happy to see your session with him. And it was also interesting because in recent years, John teaches, as you know, at the Harvard Business School, and he has this role there. And I've seen him speak in his role at the Harvard Business School, and he's super pedantic and East Coast stuffy, academic speak kind of stuff. That was not the case on your podcast. He elucidated some really interesting ideas, and he's a very big, very clear thinker about the issues that he thinks about, which is the future of work and how AI impacts civilization, basically. And one of the themes that came out of that was this idea that I hadn't heard before, because he calls the explorer's mindset, where it's kind of his job to look over the horizon, see something other people haven't seen, to go out there and get it, not just talk about it, but go out there and get it and bring it back and operationalize it in the context of his world, which I thought was a really interesting idea. And so I wanted to explore that with you a little bit, how that idea is maybe a common theme now for climbers or alpinists and business people, that explorer's mindset.
Yeah, I want to tell you a little story. You know who Chuck Pratt is, right?
Mm-hmm. Very well.
Tell the audience who Chuck Pratt was.
Chuck Pratt was one of the four great rock climbers of the Royal Robbins, Yvon Chouinard, Chuck Pratt, Tom Frost era in Yosemite in the 60s. And the four of them made the first ascent of the North American Wall in 1966, I think, which at the time was the hardest big wall in the world. It was the first time Americans had been, in the post-war era, had been the best climbers in the world. Yeah.
That's very well spoken. Thank you for explaining that on the spot with no prep. I worked at Exum Mountaineering as a mountain guide one summer, and I worked next to Chuck Pratt, and he was a huge character. This would have been 2000. He used to teach, he was in his 70s, I want to say then, and he would only teach the basic rock climbing classes, which were pretty good money, but, kind of boring. And he would spice it up by asking the students all kinds of trivia. And one day I was just assisting him, and his question was, which of the four first ascensionists of the North American Wall, so your introduction was perfect, Kyle, is not a millionaire today? And of course the answer, these people didn't even know, first of all, they don't know what a first ascent is. They don't know what the North American Wall is. They don't know, Chuck, Tom Frost's name, maybe they know Yvon Chouinard. And of course people would have, and the answer was him. And that idea kind of stuck with me and has been part of, I think that and I talked with John Windsor about this a little bit, in your era, his era of climbing, there was no path to being a professional climber. It simply did not exist. And arguably, maybe the one generation ahead of me was the first generation, the Conrad Anker and Lynn Hill generation was the first generation to kind of be able to make that happen. I think one of the great problems with people becoming professional climbers is you took, this incredible energy that those types of people bring into the world and just kind of gave them an easy job. Let's be honest, being a paid alpinist was the easiest job I've ever had in my life and will have. And before that, it was look at the things that your generation and Yvon Chouinard's generation, Tom Frost, Royal Robbins, look at Royal, Tom, and Yvon themselves, those three people and started and ran incredible companies. Mm-hmm. The North Face, with Doug Tompkins is another one of those that came out of that same era, founded in that same time, 1966, 67, 68, somewhere in there. That, you guys just crushed it. And I feel like my generation didn't really do much in that way. And I don't know why that is, but I always thought man, because I spent a lot of time with the Chouinards, and Yvon is, the more time he's one of these rare individuals, the more I got to know him, the more he was my hero. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, man, like this guy I look up to so much. How can I ever do how can you ever do what he did in his lifetime? It's just incredible. And I started to realize like the business is actually his business. Patagonia was by far his biggest lever in leaving the world a better place, which was kind of what it comes down to for most of us, is just trying to, in life, like how do we go through life making the world better and ultimately leaving it a little better than we found it. And
Chouinard is a classic example of this explorer's mindset, I think.
Yep.
Of going out to the horizon, saw things that no one else could see. I mean, he was visionary in tool making and in a product visionary is how I describe him.
100%.
And brought it back and actualized it and made a big business out of it.
Yeah.
I'm critical.
Black Diamond and
right. I'm critical of Chouinard in other ways, though, as a business guy, because as a business guy, I have, some experiences and some knowledge and some expertise that diverge from his practice at Patagonia. He built Patagonia in his image, and he and Melinda owned all of it. And it was very important to him to control that destiny. He's a control freak, and he never wanted to give any of it to anyone. But he created this mythos around, let my people surf and how great it would be to be an employee at Patagonia. He was a billionaire on Patagonia. Nobody else who worked for him was ever a billionaire. Nobody else spent any money at Patagonia, just Chouinard. Okay. True. Now, is that an indictment of him? In my opinion, yes, because in the venture capital world, our job is to not only build successful companies that produce products and services that improve the lot of everyone, but that everyone shares in that success. Every single person in Array BioPharma had stock in the company when we sold it to Pfizer. Those shares went all the way through the cap table, and we were all partners and all shared in that success. And that was not true at Patagonia. So I think it's kind of the irony that he gets lauded as this great capitalist and this awesome creator of this environmental ethos.
I do think that capitalism is incredible. I do think that business is the best way to have a large impact in the world. Like I don't feel that I can have a large impact on the world through my vote as an American citizen. I wish I felt differently about that, but reality is like I'm one of 300 and whatever million people, some 40% of which actually vote. And, I don't feel like I'm swaying national policy.
But you can have an impact through your business.
But I can do. Once it gets to a certain level, I can absolutely do that. And I think it's the same like with climbing. I tell young climbers this all the time. The rewards and the impact come after you've done all the things.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't start making money as a professional climber until after I climbed the Rupal face of Nanga Parbat. Like I was 34 years old at that point. I'd been climbing hard for 14 years, on $12,000 a year. That was the most money I ever made before I was 34, was $12,000. And then I started to be able to make a living, and I started to be able to make a good living. And I never climbed anything remotely as amazing as K7 or Nanga Parbat, again, in my opinion, but I got all the reward on the back end. And that's, I think, the way a lot of it works in business too. You have to build the business, and it has to grow and be something that people are attracted to and aspire to and participate in and love as a brand. And then on the back end of that, you can lever that into something that, you want to see in the world.
Well, of course, the explorer's mindset, going across the horizon, picking the thing, bringing it back, operationalizing, it's not generally recognized till later and rewarded until later. So that's a common experience, both in your career as an alpinist and in your career as a business person. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Delayed gratification is key.
Delayed gratification is the key to success because it takes a long time to create human capital.
Yeah.
Lead human capital doesn't occur right away. It takes a long, long time.
Yeah.
How many decades of crack climbing experience does Alex Honnold have to produce, his one great moment in sport? That's now set him up to be the iconic climber of his generation.
Yeah. 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 The 15-year overnight sensation story. Right.
What did you think about his Netflix doc on the climbing the building in Taipei?
I didn't really think about it, to be honest. I hope that he was paid some good money. I, I'm sure that that's why he did it. Like that's not a labor of love. He didn't, have a picture. My guess is that he did not have a picture of the Taipei Tower taped to his bedroom wall for the last 7 years, dreaming about it every night. So, I think that he's earned it. I think he earned the right to do whatever the hell he wants off of his successes and his career. And he took massive risks, and he applied maximum discipline and focus and toil and work to be able to do what he did. And, he's got a wife and kids now, and he should be reaping what
monetizing that human capital.
He should monetize it, because he certainly wasn't getting paid very much when he was living in his van in Yosemite climbing 300 days a year.
I expected not to like it just because it's silly and climbing, building all these people and the whole made for television kind of thing. And I really enjoyed it because he was having fun. The joy that he takes in goofing around on this, look what they're letting me do here. This is awesome. The joy he had, I like that. I like that. That was authentic.
I haven't seen any of it. And in real life, like, Alex is kind of a introverted and somewhat goofy person. So I'm glad that he could be goofy and have that be himself and be rewarded for that. That's fantastic. That's all any of us can hope for.
In your episode with Randy Levitt, which I also loved, and I love Levitt, but Levitt's got a different kind of spin. His spin is climbing doesn't matter. Nothing we do here matters. And I kind of get where he's coming from. And it's also part of his business life because he's a real estate guy, And he's not Sam Zell or Donald Trump or one of these captains of real estate. He built a nice personal real estate portfolio over time and monetized that human capital. He's obviously really good at it, I think. And he was a great trad climber of my generation. Absolutely one of the top trad climbers, but he morphed into a guy who set up hard sport routes and just sport climbed all the time.
Yep.
And, sport climbing doesn't matter in a climbing sense. It's kind of like bowling. You go, you take your family out and you have a great time, and then you turn your smelly shoes in and, go eat pizza. It's not actually, there's actually nothing there, to sport climbing. And I think that's kind of his perspective on climbing is it's informed by his sport climbing. Do you think that's true? In contrast, my favorite interview of the whole series was Greg Penner, who I don't know, although I have, high respect for in his position. And
amazing guy.
And the chairman of Walmart, the owner of the Denver Broncos, who's really transformed both in an era when either could have died as iconic businesses in someone else's hands. Yeah. Yep. And who really thinks deeply, I think, about his role in business, his role in life, and his role as an alpinist, as exemplified by his decision-making under conditions of uncertainty on Everest. I mean, there he was faced with an absolute splitter day in position, with the right guides and the right stuff and, ready to summit at 8,000 meters on the South Col and headed up the hill, and the regulators fail, and he makes the decision to go down, right? Yep. That, my life isn't, I'm not going to end my life here on the south ridge of Everest because my regulator's not working. I'm going down. That's real insight from a guy who's the chairman of Walmart.
Yeah, I think he's just such an amazing guy, and one of the most humble, and you can't find anything on Greg online. Like the internet has been scrubbed of all mention of him or any of his accomplishments or anything he does. And I don't think that's actually on purpose. I don't think it's been scrubbed per se. I think he just is not a person that needs external validation in any way, shape, or form. He just is interested in doing the things because of the processes that he's engaged in doing those things. And I think it's one of the moments when I think you find out. I think one of the interesting things about climbing that I had to learn, and one of the interesting things in parallel about business that I had to learn separately, running a small business, is that both are good ways to find out who you are and what your values are, because they get tested. And we often don't know who we are, what our values are, until we kind of come up against the limits of them. And then we're like, that's a little too far. That's not far enough. And I started off obviously as a climber mountain guide, and I felt like I was prepared for everything. And then when I got into running a small business, I felt like I was prepared for nothing. Like I was like, what am I doing? Like, I have no idea like how to do X, Y, Z, just think of anything, whether it was like what to say, how to fire someone, what to say that needed to be exited, or how to hire someone that we needed to fill this particular position, or how to train someone because we needed to bring in another coach. Like, there's a million things I just had no idea how to do as a human being. And you find out very quickly, kind of, if you are with climbing, you can kind of fake it until you make it to a certain extent, right? Like, but then there's those moments where your regulators fail high on Everest, and you can't fake it until you make it. You just have to decide, and you have to know exactly who you are, exactly who your values are, and you have to know it like that. Like, you've got 2 minutes to decide. You don't have like all day. You can't call a committee meeting. You can't call like 3 friends.
You can't hire McKinsey to do a study for you.
You can't hire McKinsey to do a study. No, none of that. Like, you've got to know right now. And if you don't make the decision in the next 2 minutes, the decision will be made for you, and you're going to die. So at some point.
That's a good insight into Penner's mindset and his decision-making under conditions of uncertainty. I think what came out for me also in that podcast was that he must be a very good judge of talent and manager of people. He must have a good eye for who to rely on and how to manage those relationships. Did you get that from him?
Yeah. And, I've had the pleasure to get to know him a little bit because he's worked with me as a guide and with my friend Vince Anderson as a mountain guide. And I've been able to go skiing with him in Aspen and ski touring. And, when I'm around someone like that, like, I just try to keep my mouth shut and like listen and watch, because I'm trying to figure out, like, it's always so cool. It's such an amazing experience. And this is one of the things that got really boring for me with climbing. I'm going to sound arrogant, but I was never the dumbest person in the room in the climbing rooms. And that got a little boring, to just be kind of quote unquote the smartest guy or the most experienced guy or one of them. And, when I stopped learning, I found that a little, not a lot of stimulation. And so with Greg, it's hard because the guy actually doesn't talk that much, right? Like, he's a pretty quiet, pretty soft-spoken guy. And it's hard to figure out actually what he does. But I think that was ultimately what I realized is, like, he's observing.
Mm-hmm.
He's asking questions. The questions are only 5 words, 7 words, 10 words long. And then he's getting like 15 minutes of answer. And that's the skill, right? Like, to like watch, figure out what to ask, and then get an answer that elucidates some aspect of the problem that he's trying to solve or thinking about. And that's a really, really cool skill to have. And he's an incredible person.
When you spent time with him in the field, was he guidable? Was he a good client?
Yeah, very, very good. And like 100, like one of the best. right? Like listened, followed directions, didn't not do what you said. Like if you said climb to the left side of the waterfall, not the right side, he did that. If you said leave that screw because we're going to use it as a directional on the way down, he did that. Like it was a joy to climb.
He really listens. Maybe that's the key takeaway. That guy has a keen ear for what people say to him.
Here's something that I struggle with a lot in my day to day is staying organized and keeping my priorities like sorted properly. And he, I think, also has a superpower for that. He's incredibly tightly scheduled. He's, I was late today to by 15 minutes, you guys, because I was on another podcast and it went over, and Greg would have never done that, right? Like that's, and I know that, and when I'm, he's when he says he's going to be there at 8:00, he's there at 8:00. He's not there at 7:55 either. When he says he needs to go at 2:30, he goes at 2:30, and he's very well structured and seems to be able to set his priorities really effortlessly.
There's a lesson in that for you, Steve, as a 100%. Business person. Yeah,
100%. And even as I was being late today, I was thinking about it like, oh God, like, Kyle would not be late. Greg would not, Penner would not be late. Like, I mean, like people who could perform it, they protect their time and they figure out how to get things done on time and on task and not mess around. I think that's his other thing. He's incredibly efficient. Like he just gets a lot done in a short amount of time.
One of the things that before you showed up or you were late, Jamie and I were talking about some of the past episodes and my experience being interviewed for the podcast this year. And one of the things I was surprised about was pretty much in all episodes, it certainly surprised me in our discussion, was how you immediately went to everyone's childhood and your experiences as a child and how that informed your growth and development as a human and how it led to your climbing and to your alpinism and your guiding and your business career and whatever. Right. And why was that? What is it about childhood experiences that are interesting to you in this podcast that you think, that you focused on? And what do you take away from those? What's the synthesis of those discussions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I honestly didn't do that on purpose. I mean, Jamie, maybe you helped create those questions. Maybe you had an idea there, but I didn't necessarily realize that until you just said that.
I might have. I mean, a few guests have talked about experiences in childhood and, how they formed their resiliency and how that resiliency has helped them on the mountain in business. I think, we only had men as guests, but I think being a father, like I'm very interested in like how people's different childhoods can kind of create, different kinds of adults and, kind of also having to accept that there is no code to crack. Like you never know. But yeah, I mean, being the father to two boys, I think maybe I want to be honest, guide them maybe away from being alpinists and being exposed to so much risk in some ways. But yeah, you do very much lean into those questions, whether I'm sliding them in there purposefully or not. The conversation, as Kyle observes, does often come back to that.
Yeah, and each one of us is a father to two boys. We have 6 boys between us, so that's kind of a fun parallel. But I think one of the things that I've learned, because as an alpinist and even as a mountain guide, I was often very focused on being efficient. And it's like, we're burning daylight. It's that idea. Like as soon as the alarm goes off, it doesn't matter if it goes off at 12:30 a.m. and you have a big objective for that day, you're burning daylight. Like you need to be like, go, go, go. And it was very hard for me to not, when Uphill Athlete started to get to this point that we had meetings because there was more than one person, more than a couple of people, we needed to align on various things or execute different projects or work on things together. I started off that way. I just would like dive in, like, here's the thing. We got to decide this. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Okay, we're going to make a decision, done, out. And one of the things I learned from is, and you're very good at this, Kyle. I've observed this in you for years. People who are good in business are good at connecting with other people. And I think questions about people's childhood and how they came to the mountains, for me, I think it was really a way to connect to the person, to the human,
I understand.
and like a little vulnerability going. Like, it's vulnerable to talk about yourself as a kid because, not all of us had amazing childhoods. I mean, I think I did, but not everybody did. And so I think that was the purpose of those questions, was to
a connection.
establish human connection.
It was a connection. But it also highlighted, in most cases, Metcalf and me and Windsor and Levitt, that we were intense kids. We were all intense kids.
Yeah.
And the community you've built at Uphill Athletes is kind of a community for people who are too intense for the rest of the world. Is that a fair statement?
I think that is a fair statement, and I think I picked up on that in the first season. I was just started looking at the guests we had in the first season when we were working on the second season. And it's like Vince Anderson and Barry Blanchard and Will Gadd. And I mean, all super intense people. And I often felt out of place in society due to my intensity. And I have particularly one of my boys is also really intense and a little ADHD. And I see the other kids sort of like back off from him because he's just like taking up all the space and all the energy. And like, people don't know how to navigate around that. And I have often felt kind of ashamed of that, and felt like I often held myself back because I felt like there was something wrong with me. I was made at various points to make. Here's a story. There's a personal story. I don't know. Maybe we can edit this out if we don't like it, but I went to a public high school, but there were these AP classes, the advanced placement classes, and it was very competitive to get into these classes. And I was in all the AP classes, and I had this really elderly English teacher in my AP English class. And at least one day a week, she would just have the class do strange exercises because she enjoyed seeing how smart the class was. And anytime there was one of the times it was mazes, and I'm very good with visual things. Like, I can just look at a maze, kind of defocus, and I see the thing, and I can just draw the front. Like, I don't know why. It's also why I'm good at navigating in the mountains. I can visualize terrain really well. That's just part of my brain works. Don't know why. She got so mad at me because she made me do maze after maze after maze. And these other kids who were, one of them was, top in his class at Yale Law years later. Like, these were some really smart kids. Like, they were struggling to do these mazes. And she was like, she told me, "You're so stupid." Like, this is a teacher yelling at me that I'm so stupid. Like, she was so mad that I could do the maze because she expected me to be the worst because she thought I was so stupid. And that was one of several things that happened in my developing life where, I was made to feel like I was not okay the way I was. And it wasn't anybody in my family. It was always teachers or in Boy Scouts or some of these other areas and activities that I was in. And so I learned to pull back. I learned to hold myself back.
Weren't there other counterexamples in your early childhood of people who celebrated your intensity?
My parents, for sure. Like, my mom being a school teacher, she kind of would lesson plan my days for me in a wonderful way, right? And got me involved in saying hey, you'd really like the Boy Scouts. And that was amazing for me because I just had these checklists, and I just had to go through and do one thing after another. And then I'd get these little rewards every once in a while, and then I'd do the next thing. But in things like individual sports was another place where that intensity was rewarded because you're just intense for yourself. You're not having to pay attention to how everybody else is doing or feeling.
Right. Well, now with your two young boys, parenting them into adulthood is really the only important thing you do, Steve.
100%.
Everything else in your life, as you know now, is trivial. that's the thing you do that's most important in your life, you know? So what do you take away from that? Having the intense boys that you would expect to have, being you, what do you take away from that experience that informs how you as a parent are going to raise those boys into a successful adulthood?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because particularly for my older boy, I feel like he's my carbon copy, and I have so much empathy for him. I can, like with the younger one, it's a little harder for me to read, but particularly Francie, like whatever he's feeling, I'm feeling in my own body. Like it's just that's the way the connection is.
And you recognize he's watching you like a hawk. It doesn't matter what you tell him; he's emulating you. Yeah.
And that has been such a test, right? Because we're human and we're imperfect, and we lose our I lose my temper. That's part of being an intense person, and I can get really angry. And then I see him getting really angry, and it's like, oh God, that was me. Like I did that. Like now he saw that. Now he's modeling that. And so I have to be better at
you're their role model.
I'm their role model. And I have to, I'm very much a parent that is trying to raise my kids to solve their own problems too. And there's, and if you can't solve the problem, then come to daddy for help. Like if your brother's bothering you and you want to smack him and you don't know what else to do other than just smack him, then come to me for help and I'll work through it with you and we'll find another solution other than smacking your brother.
Yep. Like a big part of your parenting is giving them agency. Allowing them to fend for themselves in every respect that they can. I was really, in a mode where I didn't really have, I think, a lot of the role models I needed. And I've lived, I wanted to be raised by mountain guides in Boulder, Colorado. I didn't get that chance, So I'm living vicariously through my children and my parenting of my two boys, because this is the model that I would have wanted to have been presented with, for me in my childhood, that I then improved on to give to them. And I'm really, it's the greatest thing in my life to see how they've turned out as adults now. That they have agency and they're good boys. And that's really the only important thing we do, honestly. Yeah. All this other stuff is pretty trivial.
And helping them, particularly Francie again, know how to channel his intensity in a positive way into something other than, I don't know, video games or whatever. Like that would be the lowest common denominator thing. But it's pretty fun, actually. It's mostly just a lot of fun. Especially now that we can ski everything. Like I'm getting into that era where we can just ski everything now, and it's, do things like that together that are just so much fun.
It's the best period because, they haven't gotten old. What they're like 6 and 8 now, or
7 and 10. Yeah.
7 and 10. Okay. They're fully operational. They can get out on the hill with you and do everything you want to do with them. They can enjoy that. They love you and they love hanging out with you. And you're going to have this period where you can do that stuff with them and travel all over the place and, really have those adventures with them all the way till they get to their sort of mid-teens and start developing their own relationships that supersede your dad.
And they get to, I try to really get them out with my friends. I have just like yourself. I mean, I have so many incredible friends. Like this summer, we're going to go on a wilderness backpacking trip and Mark Twite's going to come.
Nice.
Mark's a very particular, but they're going to love Mark, and it's going to be really good for Mark too, by the way.
He doesn't have any kids, does he?
He has no kids.
Okay. Yeah.
But he's a very, he's just a great person, and I want them they need to get used to the idea that there's all of these dad's friends who are also intense and also have these interesting lives, and they do cool stuff, and you have a chance to hang out with them. I mean, my kids grew up with their Uncle Strappo and their Uncle Stevie Haston and their Uncle Crusher. They thought that was awesome, to have these adventures with these guys, and they're fully empowered now in their lives to just call those guys up and go
ski and climb and do stuff. They don't need me to go climbing with strap up. It's pretty interesting.
That's great.
So let me finish our conversation with I think one of the key themes that came out of your discussion, not just with the athletes and business people this year, but also the first season which was more of a season about super athletes, really, world-class athletes, which is their ability to make the turn from the best in the world at what they were doing to the rest of their lives. You've made the successful turn from being America's greatest alpinist of your generation to a successful business guy who's actually giving something back to the next generation of athletes and helping bring them up and building a successful business, right? You made that turn. It didn't destroy your ego. It didn't cause depression and anxiety. It was not always the case for for a lot of pro athletes, not all. A lot of pro athletes have a really hard time making that transition, right? What do you think informed your success at making the turn from the top athlete to a successful business person?
Well, I would say that it caused anxiety and depression. And I would just say generally that it was very hard. And it took way longer than I thought, right? Like I thought that I could do that in a couple of years. And your description feels very generous compared to what my actual experience was, because it was super hard. And also because there was a path to just sort of continuing to be on the dole, as I like to call it, with Patagonia and Gravel and La Sportiva, and just sort of show up at some trade shows and some ice climbing festivals and make a decent middle class income and have like a really easy life. But it felt so. Dwight and I used to have a rule when we were both active climbing that we could, if we did a slideshow, we couldn't speak about anything that had happened more than 2 years ago, 2 years in the past. That was our cutoff. And so as I was even like getting to 40 and I was still talking about Nanga Parbat, which had happened 5 years prior, and there was really no more, there were some small ones, but nothing of that magnitude in terms of stories that I had to tell. It started to feel like I needed to do something else. And it comes down to this experience I had on Mount Temple in 2010. As you'll remember, I had this really bad accident. I almost died. I had a couple of hours waiting for Steve Holetsy and the Parks Canada rescue crew to fly in and pick me off of there in this incredible long line rescue that was super risky, and they completely saved my life. And if they hadn't done that, I would not be here. And I had time to think about, if I die today, what am I happy about? What do I wish would have been different? And there was 3 things. One was I was happy with the climbing I'd done. I hadn't done everything I wanted to do, but I'd done a lot. I'd done more than most, and that was a box that was checked. I had not had a family, and I had not given anything back to my community, in my opinion. And so I now is the time of my life where I'm checking boxes 1 and 2, or 3 and 4, or 2 and 3, or however you want to count it. And that still is what gets me out of bed every day. Both the things, like taking care of my kids, raising my kids, being a good dad, giving them good experiences, introducing them to amazing places, amazing people. We were talking about like Revelstoke and earlier before the podcast started, like if you had told me in 1990, the first time I rolled up to Rogers Pass and put skins on my skis, how many days of my life I would spend skiing in that little mountain range there, I would have been blown away. Like, I don't know how many nights of my life I've spent in Revelstoke. And
Hundreds. I've spent hundreds of days in the Columbia Mountains of Canada.
100%. And then hundreds in Chamonix, and hundreds in Canmore, and dozens in Huaraz. And I've spent 2 years of my life in the country of Pakistan. 24 months of my life I've spent in the Karakoram Mountains of Pakistan. And, I didn't know that was how, and now I'm going to I really want to introduce my kid and I'll tell them now, hey, pay attention, because this is a place you're likely going to be coming back to your entire life. And the layout doesn't really change. The church in Chamonix is always going to be over here. The Flagère lift is always going to be here. This is always going to probably be, where, I'm forgetting the name of it. That little hole in the wall, burger joint, is on the Rue de Bacard. That's always going to be there. And I think that's
it's a metaphor for their lives, because a lot of things in their lives are going to change.
Yeah.
But a lot of things that you've experienced and that you're expert at, that you've mastered, are going to stay the same. And that's what you want to try to pass along to them, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really good. Having made the turn, though, and having experienced having fallen off the north face of Temple and almost died, right? And being heroically rescued. I know the CMH pilot who long lined you off of that thing is one of the best in the business. Guy's unbelievable. I've belly skied with him a ton of times. Do you feel like that was the break with your past that enabled you to experience your future?
That was a break.
Okay. Do you think that your guests that you've over the last 2 seasons who've made the transition, who made the turn successfully, had a break like that?
So in season 1, most of them didn't. And most of them, I think, didn't make the turn, or were trying to make the turn and were in the middle of the turn. And I think in season 2, it was people who, integrated both. They integrated, like yourself, integrated the mountains and a business career, and in most cases, family as well. And so that's why I was so interested in this group of people, is the integration. And I think it's really getting to the question of, I had this extracurricular stimulus that nobody should have to go through, and I wouldn't wish on anyone, but yet for me it was necessary. And is there a scenario in which, or would there be, what would my model be? And I don't think I have a role model to make the turn. I don't think Chenard or Royal Robbins or you had to make it in the same way that I did, because I was one of the early people that was able to be a professional climber, and Conrad's still a professional climber. He's one generation ahead of me, and that was the path. That was the path that was open to me. And I just personally, for me, didn't want to continue on that path. And it felt also very important for me at a certain point, to really just cut the rope. And what I mean by cut the rope is there's this idea in climbing that you can kind of fix ropes up the wall or up the face or whatever. You can go up and down the ropes as much as you want, and you're always safe. And for a long time, I was running uphill athlete and I was a professional climber, and I sort of had these two things. And the bigger uphill athlete got, the harder it was to manage, because I had a lot of free time, but I didn't have infinite free time. I still had obligations. And at a certain point, it was like, I need to remove this safety net of these salaries that I get every month and the funding my retirement plan gets every month, and commit, because that's how climbing is, right? You have to, at some point, you have to cut the rope or pull the ropes or whatever the analogy is, and just fully commit to the path in order to be actually on it. And that happened during COVID, basically. That happened 5 years ago or so. And that was, everyone, again, I looked at Chenard, because one thing about him is he always took big swings and made big bets on things that at the time seemed like really bad ideas to everyone but him. And that felt like one of those to me. I was like, everybody hates this idea. My wife was completely against it. Everybody I talked to thought I was completely crazy. Why would you do that? And I was like, that's the reason this is a good idea. Everybody thinks it's a good idea. It feels right to me. I got to do it. And I think it was the best. I think it was. I think that's Uphill Athlete wouldn't be what it is today if I hadn't done that. That's for sure. And I wouldn't be helping as many people. And that's really ultimately what I'm trying to do.
Well, I'm grateful to you and to Uphill Athlete for the community and the work that you've done, because it creates space for a group of people that otherwise don't have a real way to connect and a voice with each other. And I'm really grateful to you for this podcast series, which I thoroughly have embraced, as you can tell, because I hear the same themes that or have run through my life and have run through yours and have run through a lot of other people's.
Yeah.
And that we can then share with a generation that might pay attention to us, might not, but at least they hear those themes and can integrate them into their experience and don't have to feel isolated or outside of it because of the intensity that they feel about the things that they do in their lives.
It's about seeing the route or the path that nobody else sees and going through and blazing that trail, so to speak. And, and that's one of the things, like I was just saying, I didn't have a role model to make that transition that I didn't feel like I did, at least. And I would like to try to create that. And actually one of the paths now is coaching. I think some of the coaches who are really adept, they make really good money, and, they can translate all the years of experience they have with running or climbing or whatever it is into answering questions about shoes and hydration and which running pack that people should use and all those things, plus be able to, help them with the training and the programming and when to have the rest day and when to push and when to hold back. And so that's super gratifying to be able to do that. Yep. I think it's also just really I go back to this, and Jamie, you'll remember these first conversations about what is Voice of the Mountains. And it really started off just as a creative project. I had no idea what it was really going to become or do, but it really doesn't serve any business purpose per se. Like, I mean, I don't think this is a podcast that generates like leads for coaching. I just think that's not really what this is about. And I had Mark Twight told me he thought it was like my most important work yet. Those were his words.
I agree with that. I
was really surprised.
I think it could have ultimately as much or more impact if you keep it up, keep it going. Don't stop, Steve. Keep finding people. And I've got some suggestions for you and Jamie for next season, but keep it up. It's a good series. I'm gonna model Greg Penner and end the conversation because I have my next appointment at exactly 12:30, so I was on time, right? But
excellent.
thank you, and thank you, Jamie, for your excellent production help and
thank you for doing all the heavy lifting today. You were you might be the best interviewer on this podcast right now.
I'm way more comfortable doing that. I'm way more comfortable doing that than I was having Steve House root around my early life in Atlanta growing up as a kid. That was pretty uncomfortable. So I'm really glad to have this opportunity. And Steve, I hope to see you and the boys this summer in Boulder. You're always welcome.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
All right.
I'd love to come visit. Thanks so much, Kyle.
All right. Thanks, guys.
One of the most common questions I get is, how should I get started with training? Well, they say the first step is the hardest, so let's make that easy. We are offering free 4-week samples of our most popular training plans for mountaineering, trail running, climbing, and more. Go to uphilathlete.com/letsgo to sign up for our newsletter, and you will not only get monthly insights on training for uphill athletes, but you'll also get a sample training plan. It's totally free, so why wait? That's uphilathlete.com/LETSGO.